He's slipping away. The words rang through the sterile corridors of Caldwell Tower Hospital like a warning bell. Nurses hurried past with clipped footsteps, dragging oxygen tanks for stands and portable monitors in a chaotic ballet. Beeps and alarms mingled with the hiss of pressurized oxygen, creating a tense symphony that seemed to echo Marcus Caldwell's fading heartbeat. Inside the ICU room, Marcus lay motionless on the bed. His face, normally sharp and commanding, was pale and slack. Machines displayed erratic readings. His heart rhythm weak, blood pressure dangerously low, oxygen saturation fluctuating. Despite the combined efforts of 20 of the city's most renowned doctors, including specialists flown in from out of state, every treatment had failed. Dr. Spencer, the head cardiologist, ran his fingers through his thinning hair, his expression tense and tired. "We've tried everything: high-dose medication, surgical interventions, even experimental therapies. Nothing is working. I don't know how much longer we have." His voice carried both authority and desperation. Around him, other doctors exchanged grim looks, pacing the room as if movement could somehow summon a solution. The hospital was silent beyond the chaos of the ICU. Yet in that silence, a single pair of eyes observed everything. Eliza Johnson, the longtime housekeeper of the Caldwell estate, stood quietly outside the room. Dressed in her modest uniform, she looked ordinary to anyone who passed, but her gaze was sharp and unwavering. She had spent over a decade caring for the Caldwell household, noticing things that others dismissed, subtle changes in demeanor, minor ailments, faint sounds that most would ignore. Her life had been one of service, yes, but also of careful observation. And tonight, her instincts screamed that the doctors were missing something critical. Eliza crouched slightly to get a better view through the narrow window into Marcus's room. Her eyes scanned the charts, monitors, and notes scattered across the counters. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, "There's something they're overlooking." A nurse shot her a wary glance. "Excuse me, ma'am, you shouldn't be here." Eliza straightened. "I know my place," she said softly, her voice calm. "But I've been around this family long enough to notice details that others ignore. Something is being missed." She remembered Marcus's complaints from just a few weeks ago. Dizziness in the mornings, an odd rash along his forearms, fleeting twitches in his hands. The doctors had dismissed these symptoms as minor or the side effects of stress and overwork. But Eliza knew better. Small details mattered, especially when it came to someone's life. As alarms beeped again, she reviewed the vital signs with a practiced eye. Her mind worked quietly, logically, connecting symptoms, medications, and recent lab results. She noted trends in readings that seemed insignificant to the overworked specialists. And there it was, a subtle pattern buried in the data. Her lips pressed together, and a determined gleam appeared in her eyes. She straightened and whispered once more, louder this time, to herself, "I think I know what's wrong, and it's not the heart." Meanwhile, inside the ICU, 20 doctors continued their frantic work, oblivious to the revelation forming just beyond the door. The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus Caldwell, the billionaire whose wealth and influence had shaped industries, might die despite every possible medical intervention. Outside, the quiet figure of Eliza Johnson prepared to challenge the impossible, armed only with observation, intuition, and a lifetime of unnoticed wisdom. Eliza had always been attentive, a quiet observer in a household where wealth often overshadowed subtle details. While the doctors relied on high-tech machines, lab results, and protocols, she relied on intuition honed by years of watching Marcus, his habits, his moods, the faintest changes in his body. Tonight, her mind raced, reviewing everything she had noticed over the past weeks. She recalled the mornings when Marcus would rise from bed, his face slightly flushed, complaining of a strange, tingling sensation in his fingers. He had brushed it off as fatigue, but Eliza had noticed his lips appearing pale, sometimes even bluish, in the early hours before the sun had fully risen. His hands twitched now and then, almost imperceptibly, and sometimes he wheezed softly while asleep. Small, almost meaningless signs that none of the doctors had seemed to connect. Eliza took a deep breath and stepped cautiously into the ICU room, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, Dr. Spencer," she said. The doctors barely glanced at her, caught up in the flurry of procedures. I think it's not his heart. It's something else entirely. A chuckle rippled through the group of specialists. A housekeeper telling us what's wrong with a billionaire. One of them sneered. We've got 20 doctors here. Do you really think your observations are relevant? Eliza remained calm. She ignored the mocking smiles and approached Marcus's bedside, carefully examining the chart that listed his medications, symptoms, and lab results. Her eyes lingered on the recent blood tests. On first glance, nothing appeared abnormal, but she knew where to look. She traced the numbers with her finger, focusing on the potassium levels that no one had monitored with sufficient attention. She felt for his pulse, gently checking his wrist. There was a subtle swelling she had seen before, almost imperceptible, but her instincts told her it was important. Her heart beat faster, not with panic, but with clarity. Hyperkalemia, she whispered. It's the potassium. His potassium levels are dangerously high. That's why the heart medications aren't working. The doctors are treating the symptom, not the cause. The lead doctor, Dr. Spencer, finally turned to face her. Hyperkalemia? Are you serious? His tone mixed disbelief and irritation. We ran blood tests. Everything seemed normal. Eliza shook her head. They're checking at the wrong times. Look at the trend over the past week. The potassium spikes at night, when he's asleep. That's why the treatments aren't taking effect. He's essentially being treated for the wrong problem. The room fell silent. Every doctor froze mid-motion, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. For the first time in hours, hope flickered. A nurse quickly pulled up the chart on the monitor, and they could all see the pattern Eliza had described. The numbers told the story she had already deduced. The imbalance had gone unnoticed because no one had been looking at the right data at the right time. Eliza's eyes softened as she looked at Marcus. We can fix this, she said with quiet confidence. We just need to correct the potassium levels and monitor him closely. The heart isn't failing, it's reacting to this imbalance. For a moment, there was tension, as the room filled with unspoken questions. Could a housekeeper truly outsmart 20 seasoned doctors? Could her observations really save the life of the billionaire who seemed untouchable even by medical science? Then, slowly, the lead doctor nodded. All right, let's follow her lead. And just like that, the tide began to turn. Once Eliza's observation was taken seriously, the ICU erupted into controlled chaos. Dr. Spencer immediately called the nurses over, instructing them to repeat the blood tests. But this time, potassium levels were to be measured hourly. The doctors moved swiftly, setting up new 4 lines, adjusting medications, and calculating dosages with meticulous precision. Machines beeped incessantly, each tone carrying the weight of urgency. Eliza stood quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. She didn't need to shout instructions. Her role now was to guide, to observe, and to anticipate. Her heart pounded with a mix of worry and determination. She knew that if the potassium levels weren't brought down in time, Marcus could suffer a cardiac arrest at any moment. Every second mattered. Hours passed with tense monotony. The doctors monitored every fluctuation, their eyes flicking constantly between Marcus's vitals and the lab results. Eliza silently counted the minutes, noting subtle changes in his breathing and skin color, whispering reminders to herself. Steady now. Careful. Not too fast. At one point, Dr. Spencer leaned toward her, his face pale and serious. If this doesn't work, we'll lose him. We've done everything we can, and his heart is still struggling. Eliza's eyes met his. Just keep the potassium balanced, she said calmly. He'll respond if we correct the root cause. Trust the data, and trust him to fight. With renewed focus, the medical team followed her guidance. They administered calcium gluconate to stabilize his heart, started insulin and glucose to shift potassium into the cells, and initiated continuous cardiac monitoring. The 4 drips hissed and gurgled, adjusting at precise intervals. Each change brought a small, fragile hope, a slight rise in blood pressure, a faint return of color to his lips, a more regular heartbeat. Minutes stretched into hours, and the morning sunlight began to filter through the blinds, casting golden streaks across the hospital room. The tension was palpable, yet a subtle sense of optimism started to take root. Eliza remained by the bedside, whispering softly to Marcus, as if her voice alone could bolster his strength. Stay with us, Marcus, you're not done yet. Finally, as the first rays of the sun touched the city skyline. The monitors showed a steady, healthy rhythm. The heart rate normalized, blood pressure stabilized, and oxygen levels returned to safe ranges. Marcus's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. He coughed weakly, his hand twitching slightly as life returned to it. Color began to flow back into his cheeks, and the tension in the room broke like a dam. Doctors who had been tense and almost defeated moments ago now exchanged astonished glances. Nurses whispered excitedly, and even the machines seemed to beep with relief. 20 top specialists had struggled for days, yet it was a housekeeper's keen observation, her unwavering attention to the smallest details, that had saved the billionaire's life. Eliza finally allowed herself a small smile. Her eyes were still vigilant, scanning the monitors and Marcus's reactions, but relief began to seep into her being. Against all odds, through observation, intuition, and care, a life had been saved. And in that moment, the quiet, often overlooked housekeeper became the most important person in the room. Word of the miraculous recovery spread through Caldwell Tower Hospital like wildfire. Staff whispered in awe about the housekeeper who had outshone 20 top doctors. Some nurses shook their heads, marveling at how someone so unassuming could notice what the most brilliant medical minds had missed. Doctors who had initially scoffed now found themselves re-examining their assumptions, humbled by the sharp insight of someone they had underestimated. Marcus's family, who had been waiting anxiously outside the ICU, were the first to truly grasp the magnitude of what had happened. His sister, usually composed and commanding, stood with her hand over her mouth, staring at the monitors in disbelief. His business partner, who had flown in immediately upon hearing the news, muttered under his breath, "It wasn't the treatment, it was her." Eliza's presence in the room was quiet but commanding. She didn't seek recognition, she never had. Her eyes scanned Marcus as he regained consciousness, noting his vital signs, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and the gradual return of strength to his limbs. When he opened his eyes and saw her, there was a flicker of understanding, even gratitude, before his lips moved weakly. "You?" Even the skeptical lead doctor, Dr. Spencer, approached her. Normally stoic and unyielding, his expression now carried an unusual softness, a rare acknowledgement of humility. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, "I owe you an apology and my respect. Without your observation, we would have lost him. I didn't believe it at first, but you were right." Eliza simply smiled, her demeanor calm and dignified. "I was just paying attention," she said softly. "I've been around this family for years. I noticed things." There was no pride in her words, only the quiet confidence of someone who had always known that details matter, that small observations can save lives. Marcus's voice, hoarse but growing stronger, interrupted the room. "You saved my life," he said, reaching out to grasp her hand. His gaze held a mixture of gratitude, awe, and humility. "I don't care if anyone else believes it. You saw what no one else could. Thank you." His words resonated through the room, and even the doctors felt the weight of their earlier assumptions. The atmosphere shifted entirely. The hospital staff who had previously dismissed Eliza as just a housekeeper now treated her with newfound respect. Her role was no longer seen as mere service. She had become a central figure in the story of a life saved against all odds. Conversations among the staff shifted from casual chatter to praise, stories of her keen observation spreading like wildfire across the wards. Even the media caught wind of the story. Reporters flocked to the hospital, cameras rolling, eager to document the incredible tale of the housekeeper whose knowledge, intuition, and attention to detail had surpassed 20 doctors. The story became a sensation, not just because it was miraculous, but because it was a testament to the idea that wisdom, courage, and insight can come from the most unexpected places. For Eliza, there were no fanfares, no speeches, just a quiet dignity. She returned to her duties with the same attention to detail that had saved Marcus's life, but now she did so with recognition. For the first time, the world saw what she had always known, that her sharp mind, her observation, and her care were powerful enough to change a life. And Marcus, now awake and recovering, never let her forget it. In the days that followed Marcus Caldwell's near-death experience, the billionaire's world seemed to shift on its axis. The stark realization that 20 world-class doctors had been unable to save him, while a housekeeper had identified the critical issue, weighed heavily on him. It forced Marcus to rethink not just his health, but the way he viewed people and the world around him. Eliza, meanwhile, returned to her work with quiet dignity. The household ran as smoothly as ever, but something had changed. She was no longer seen as just a caretaker or a servant. She had earned the respect of the family, the doctors, and even the city's community who had caught wind of the story. Marcus began seeking her counsel, asking her to review his schedules, his diet, even small personal details he had previously overlooked. He realized that her attention to nuance and her observational skills were rare and invaluable. The promotion that came afterward wasn't just in title, it was in trust and responsibility. Marcus formally acknowledged Eliza as a household manager and advisor, giving her authority over many aspects of the home she had long cared for. More importantly, he treated her as an equal, valuing her insights and judgment. Colleagues and friends who visited the Caldwell estate quickly learned to respect her opinion. Marcus's approval alone carried weight, but Eliza's quiet authority commanded attention without a single word of arrogance. The story of her intuition spread beyond the walls of the mansion. Local media covered it, with headlines praising the housekeeper who saved a billionaire, and social media buzzing with admiration. The tale resonated because it was more than a miraculous recovery. It was a lesson in humility, observation, and the power of seeing what others overlook. People everywhere were reminded that brilliance and life-saving insight can come from the most unexpected places. For Marcus, the experience sparked a lasting change. He began to value human connection and careful observation over mere wealth and authority. Meetings with his board were approached differently, and he listened more, questioned assumptions, and relied less solely on data and status. He understood, finally, that insight doesn't reside only in prestigious titles or certificates. It resides in those who truly pay attention. And Eliza? She continued to fulfill her duties with her signature precision, yet now her eyes shone with a quiet confidence that came from being recognized for her talents and her care. Whenever broken items needed fixing, schedules needed management, or details required careful attention, she approached them as she always had, with patience, diligence, and the understanding that the smallest observation could make the biggest difference. Marcus often recounted the story to visitors, emphasizing one lesson above all: never underestimate someone who pays attention. Sometimes they see what the world misses. He would pause, look at Eliza, and add, and sometimes that someone can save your life. The city remembered her. The household thrived. And in every small detail, Eliza proved that true wisdom and life-saving insight are not measured by wealth, title, or recognition, but by observation, dedication, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. The housekeeper who had saved a billionaire had, in her quiet way, changed not just one life, but the perspective of everyone around her.